Brenden Nunes of the Kings Herald, the Kings Pulse, and the Kings Beat. Let's start with the important notes here. Brenden, did you finish The Godfather?
I did not. And I'm planning on finishing it right after this. I got a whole bunch of errands going on this morning, and we finished our recording at like 1:30. And it's a very long movie, guys, but I am finishing it right when we finish with this, I'm turning it on.
All right. We'll give you a pass. I'll give you a pass because you're wearing a Jay-Z shirt. So you get a pass for not finishing The Godfather. That's fine. You know how to win my heart. You got the whole shirt.
He's
totally
at a very crucial
some
point
points
in the movie. Are you still at the same point in the movie? Did you put it on at all last night?
No, I did not think that there was any way that I was getting through the last hour and a half, 2 hours that was remaining. So no, okay. I'm still at that the part where it seems like things are about to go down.
Things are about to go down.
Is it about to go down with the Sacramento Kings? How's that for a transition? How are you? I genuinely, I try to pick up on your vibes on the Kings Beat podcast and the Kings Pulse podcast, Brenden. But like, are you an overly optimistic guy right now? Are you an even keel guy right now? Or are you Sean Cunningham? Like, nah. Like, we're gonna have to wait. I don't want to hear it. Like, we're gonna have to wait.
I'm skeptical of what the long-term plan and route for this team is. I am still worried about, I guess, kind of the episode I had that I was just going crazy about how does this team ever get out of the first round. Like, I still have those same concerns, but I think I'm optimistic headed into this next season because I think that we're going to get 70 games of really watchable basketball. And I don't really know that you could have said that last year and years prior. So, like, starting from a low bar, I think that they're going to be competent and have a good enough roster to be in a position where they could win any night, really.
We had a discussion yesterday on the Kings Beat about the over-under at 32.5. And you're pretty positive that they're going to break that 32.5 over, right? Like, because it seems really low to me. I got to be honest. Although I did, we jokingly talked about it on the pod. In my 12 years covering the team, they've broke 32.5 wins exactly 2 times. And one was George Karl era and one was Dave Yeager. They've never actually broken the 32.5 more than that.
Which is just a shame, and I know that their past has to be factored in, and it's probably a decent place to look on what's going to happen in the future. But, like, I don't know. I always struggle with that conversation because this is not the same roster that's been around for 13 years. They have a new coaching staff, a new front office, fairly new, that's kind of putting everything into place. So I always struggle to find a balance, and I think this is also because I'm new and didn't go through these 13 years like James did. But I struggle to find the balance of, like, how much should the things that happened in the past matter compared to, like, what we're predicting going into these next years.
I think that's a totally fair thing to point out. And that's kind of something James and I were talking about earlier, in that it feels like, Monty McNair felt like, all right, this is the Monty McNair hire felt like this may be the start of the end of dysfunction. And, like, we may finally be on the right track to fixing things here with the Sacramento Kings organization. And then James Ham tweeted out, oh, Luke Walton will be back next year as head coach. And then it immediately called into question, all right, maybe we're not there yet. And I don't mean that as an insult on Luke Walton. And I'm not trying to take shots at Luke. What I mean more is that I got to imagine Monty McNair at some point wanted to be able to pick his own coach. And the fact that we abandoned ship with Luke Walton 17 games into the next season, you had to go through the Alvin Gentry stuff, and you really just tossed all of last season away. It feels like now with the Mike Brown hire, he seems to be elated ever since calling in Keegan Murray's name at the draft. I thought he had a solid, I'm going to lump them together and say free agency, in the fact that they signed Malik Monk, but also traded for Kevin Huerter in a 24 or so hour span. Like, I feel like it's fair to kind of put that stuff aside for now. Like, it's okay. You know what? That doesn't count. That's not the same group. It's not the same players. It's not the same front office. It's not the same anything. That works now until something goes wrong, and then you just throw your hands up and you go, Kings, same old thing. And the idea, to quote James Ham yesterday, got to avoid the drama.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely have to. And I think an interesting aspect of this is when the Kings were bringing in a new GM, and kind of my idea of Monty, from what I read, is that he's somebody that had a really good relationship with the coaching staff in Houston, that he was kind of like the bridge between the front office and the coaching staff, and was communicating with Mike D'Antoni a lot. And I think that's an aspect that's intriguing to me about him just picking his own coach for the first time and seemingly being around Mike Brown a good amount. You know, I think just as somebody that is talked about as believing that relationship is really important, and kind of the guy that was in charge of that in Houston, I think that is encouraging to me. And this idea of like avoiding drama, I think, is easier when everybody's on the same page. And that's kind of the feeling that I'm getting right now with this roster. I don't know if you feel the same, James.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this a little bit. It feels like Mike Brown just keeps adding pieces that he knows. And I think it's good that we have synergy between the front office and the coaching staff, where a guy like Chima Moneki or KZ Akpala are added. And so when you take those guys and you put them at the end of your bench, whether they play or not, we don't know. But what we already know about those players, and the same can go with Chimezi Metu, is that they have all played for Mike Brown before. They all know the system. They all know the terminology. So as opposed to working with a bench of young players at the end that don't know anything about what's happening and are trying to learn and take in what's happening, and doing it on the fly in a training camp setting where you really don't have enough time. And, you know, again, this whole entire team has to learn all new terminology, all new play calls, all new offensive, defensive sets, to have players at the end of the bench that already know what Mike Brown is doing, to have an entire coaching staff of guys that not only can support Mike Brown, but can support the other guys that are on the staff that maybe don't know the terminology, that don't know an offensive set, say, hey, this is what he's talking about right there, and just in case you didn't know. Because that's the thing. Like in the NBA, everyone runs the same stuff. The problem is that they call it something different. Like almost every coach calls like some of the play sets different. So I think we're seeing a different synergy than what we've seen in the past between the coaching staff, the players, even if they're into the bench players, and the sort of the grand scheme, the whole package coming together.
Do you guys think that this is something that Sean talked about a little bit on the last episode of the Kings Beat, and I've kind of contemplated myself? Like, how likely do you think it is that the Kings have a little bit of, I guess, growing pains with this adjustment to a new scheme, a new coach, and a significant change in roster? Like, the margin for error is really slim in my mind for a team that's trying to make the postseason as soon as possible in a Western Conference that has a lot of competition. But, like, Damian, do you think that there's a decent chance this team gets out to a slow start?
No, because it's really the one thing they can't afford to do. And I think they're smart enough to recognize that. They can't get off to a slow start. They can't have those growing pains. They've got to have the best training camp like they've ever had. They've got to be locked in. Like, I understand the theory, and anytime a new coach comes in, it makes sense to think, no, it's going to take some time to implement all of this. But as you just said, the margin for error is so thin. De'Aaron Fox isn't new. You know, thankfully, Domantas Sabonis was around a little bit. He's not new either. If Harrison Barnes is here when the season starts, he's not new. Rashawn Holmes isn't new. You still have core guys here who should be. Keegan Murray looks to be NBA ready. He seems to be a high basketball IQ guy. Davion Mitchell, again, a guy who I think is going to take a strong leadership role in the team this year. He's not new either. I get the thought of the growing pains because we've seen it so many times, but I'm going to go, no, they can't afford to, and no, I don't think they will, because I think they know that they can't.
Yeah, and I'll add this too. The Kings specifically went with Mike Brown as opposed to a guy like Will Hardy or a guy like Darvin Ham, because they think the transition will be easier. They believe that his status as a veteran coach who has coached great players and had a ton of success, like what, a 616 win percentage, that's going to translate quicker. I think where the growing pains are is that you're still like you're going to try to make a bunch of like square pegs fit in round holes. You got a bunch of guys who don't play defense for a defensive minded coach. And so that's going to be an issue. So I think there will be growing pains in that aspect where guys are going to be asked to do things that they're uncomfortable doing or they haven't proven that they can do at the NBA level. And so that's going to be a little bit tough. But at the same time, I think everyone is excited, and Mike Brown brings a certain energy to the room that he's going to get pretty good buy-in, I think, early on in his career in Sacramento.
I could see that. I hope that you guys are right, and I think the buy-in will show itself most on the defensive end because, like you said, they don't have the greatest defensive talent on this roster, but I do think that they have guys that are capable and should be able to improve them from this, what already was a pretty low bar and starting point that they've been at these years prior. Like, Fox is a better defender than what we've seen, and I think he could come into the year having something to prove. But I think the beginning of the year is really going to tell us a lot, in my mind, about the odds that this team has of making the postseason because, like I said, margin for error is really not there. And if they come out the gates hot, then great. But a little bit of a slow start just makes that we're going to turn it around later, or when are we going to finally have everything click and hit the gas? Like, just needs that to happen even sooner. So I think the beginning of the year is going to tell us a lot.
You think Fox can elevate himself as a defender?
I think so. I think that he just shouldn't be a bad defender. I don't think that he needs to be locked down or anything like that, but I think that he just needs to keep his guy in front of him, like make him change directions one time. Don't let him go right past you on one or two dribbles. Like, I'm going with yes just because I don't feel like I'm asking all that much.
Do you feel like you have to, the Kings have to ask more? I mean, if he's going to be the guy, it can't just be that he goes out and, what's 24 points a game last season, 25 the year before. I mean, I still think he has another gear where he could average 28 a game and be one of the top scorers in the league. But it's got to be more than that, right? He has to be engaged on the defensive end. He has to be one of the leaders on the team that helps take this team to the next level. And realistically, the only way this team gets to the next level won't be on the offensive end. It will be if they can show a massive improvement on the defensive side of the ball. Because, in the NBA, you can try to outscore people, but eventually you just get caught in a rut where you're losing, 122 to 140, which we've seen in the last couple of years.
Brenden, what's the most impactful?
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Brenden, go ahead. I think there's a small little delay here when we talk to each other, but go ahead. Respond to James.
No worries. Sorry if it's connection on my end here. I definitely get what James is saying, and I just think that for this season, the Sacramento Kings are, in my mind, going to be a team that wins games because of their offense and just can't have their defense kill them. Like, I think that Fox can be good on that end, but how many teams are really looking at their point guard and saying that that's the guy that needs to be our difference maker defensively? Like, I think that having Sabonis as your center that's playing 30 minutes a night, like, unless you get some stellar wings, defensive wings that also are capable on the offensive end, like, I kind of think you're forcing yourself into your recipe being a team that has to win games primarily offensively and just, like, do everything you can to not be bottom 10 on defense.
What's the most impactful move you think the Kings have made so far this offseason?
First reaction was Kevin Huerter. I think that he's a really good starter in the league, and the spacing that he provides, I think he gives them really good size. Like, I really like the idea that your three wings that you're going to have around De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis are now Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray, and Harrison Barnes. Like, I really like the size, shooting versatility that you get from that group as complementary pieces. I think that Herter is an upgrade on the defensive end. I don't think he's somebody that's like a tone setter on that end either, but you're talking about an upgrade from Buddy Hield, Tyrese Halliburton. Like, I still think that that's an improvement with what Kevin Herter brings. But also, when you ask that question, the other thing that came into mind is Mike Brown. Like, if there is guys buying in, and again, I think that you mostly see that on the defensive end and ball movement on offense, like a trust and genuine culture that starts to get built, then I could see how Mike Brown is the biggest addition here.
Yeah, if I were to answer that, I would say you're onto something with Herter for sure. But I think Keegan being a player that has the potential to push other players down rungs probably will have the biggest long-term impact. Like, immediate impact, it might be Herter. Well, it's probably Mike Brown, but then Herter. But like overall impact and sort of where he projects, I still think having a guy that you look at and go, okay, he's probably in his prime going to be a third option on the offensive end at a minimum. And when you're faced with the possibility of losing Harrison Barnes at the end of the season, that's a big deal because he right now is your third option, and he's walking into the final year of a contract, and that's not a good feeling to like look at your current situation and try to manage that with what your future is. And so I think Murray at least gave them that understanding that you already see that he can be a number 3 at worst. And so that's impactful for me, if especially long-term roster creation, it's impactful.
Maybe not necessarily speaking to a specific player, and I'm curious both of your responses to this, Brenden. I'll ask you first. What's and again, it doesn't have to be a specific player, but when you look at this roster, what's the main thing you think is missing?
Probably wing depth, I think, is the primary thing that stands out. Like, I think that Keegan Murray and Harrison Barnes fill that. Or I guess forwards, I guess you would say, more so than wings. But I think that guys that are...
Oh, he got the James Ham frozen treatment.
Oh, we lost him.
He got the James Ham frozen treatment there. Brandon's on 56K today. I think that's what that old dial-up modem used to be called, the 56K. But you were in the midst of talking wing depth, forward depth is an issue.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I think that just forwards that are impactful defenders, guys that can kind of fill that hole of rim protection, really, that they're not going to have with Domantas Sabonis there at the 5. Guys that can make that impact on defense and then still be passable on offense. Like, if the Kings got one of those guys, I feel like it'd be a major hole that they're filling, and I don't see who that is right now.
Yeah, if I were to answer the same question, it would be they need that one guy that not only plays defense but actually plays minutes. So it's nice to bring in a bunch of guys that you think can play defense, but that don't actually step on the court. That doesn't make it, it doesn't help your defensive rating if a guy logs 0 minutes in a night. So if they could right now find that player that you just look at and you go, okay, he can change the entire sort of energy on the defensive end. They don't have a player like that. I think, again, Murray is a guy who plays defense, but he's not just going to like stake his name as a defensive stalwart. I like Keon Ellis and what he does, but again, he's stepping on the court is going to be tough. So, if you're looking at one move that you could make, it's to find a defensive catalyst that could really be impactful and, long, whether he plays the 3 or the 4. If he's got some shot blocking ability, that would be great. But overall, he's got to be able to disguise some of the issues that some of your other players have. And I still, if I'm looking at this offseason, what would make this offseason perfect, it would be finding that defensive catalyst that can, really take you from the number 28th defense in the league. And when you add a coach and you add some improvements from some of your players and some improved players, takes you to a top like 15 or 12 defense. and that's where I think this team could really take a jump.
Brenden, great stuff as always, my friend. You've got a classic to go finish. I hope you're not streaming it, because speculation in the chatty house is you're running out of internet. So hopefully you got a new AOL CD that you can load up in there and finish the Godfather.
He has no idea what you're saying.
I was gonna say what's great about
No,
that.
I'm kind of familiar.
No clue what an AOL CD is. Are you familiar with dial-up internet?
I've heard the name.
Okay, all right, bye, Brenden. It's fine.
Appreciate you having me, guys.
Always. That's Brenden Nunes, the Kings Herald podcast, the Kings Pulse podcast.